The Leviathan Ark did not sail. It drifted a fossilized mountain of bone, an ancient starlight floating through the ether sea. To the uninitiated, it looked like the corpse of a god, left to rot in the void, its ribcage forming the vaulted ceiling of the sky, its spine the main thoroughfare of a city that should not exist. But to the thousands of students arriving for the new term, it was the galaxy's best academy, a place where the laws of physics politely stepped aside for the older, hungrier laws of magic. Frederick stood on the docking bay of the industrial sector, clutching the handle of a suitcase that had seen better decades. He wore a coat that was arguably gray, though it might have been blue in a previous life, and he possessed the kind of face that was remarkably good at being forgotten. He had spent years perfecting the art of being a background character, a piece of scenery that eyes slid over in search of something more interesting. Around him, the air shimmered with the chaotic energy of the arrival. Ether winds cold and biting whipped through the open docking ports carrying the scent of ozone and crushed violets. He watched a young vampire from the nocturne court glide past his luggage levitating behind him on a stream of crimson mist. A group of wolf-kin from the Lunar Grove pack bounded over the railing, their laughter sounding like barking thunder. To his left, a feline student of the Peridian clans was bargaining with a porter flipping a coin that seemed to land on heads 3 times in a row, despite the laws of probability. Frederick checked his pocket watch. It was 4 in the afternoon local arc time. He needed to find his dormitory, unpack, and establish himself as the most boring entity on this vessel before dinner at 6. He began to walk his boots, making a dull, rhythmic thud against the calcified floor. He did not look up at the emerald lights of the upper districts, or down at the churning machinery of the lower levels. He looked straight ahead, his eyes glazed with a practiced disinterest. However, the universe, as Frederick had long suspected, had a personal vendetta against his desire for anonymity. The Great Hall was located in what had once been the Leviathan's stomach. It was a cavernous space where the walls were lined with bioluminescent moss that pulsed in time with the faint, rhythmic thrum of the Ark's core. Thousands of students from the 4 houses sat at long floating tables segregated by species and magical alignment. Frederick sat at the very edge of a table, designated for exchange and miscellaneous species. It was the table for the leftovers, the ones who did not fit into the grand hierarchies of vampire wolf-cat or fae. He pulled a small, battered metal kettle from his bag. It was made of tin, dented on one side, as if it had stopped a very angry rock, and it was entirely non-magical. He placed a small heating coil beneath it, a piece of simple human engineering, and waited for the water to boil. Next to him sat a freshman who looked like a bipedal avian, his feathers puffed up against the chill of the hall. The boy was shaking. The ether sea was notoriously cold for species that had evolved on warm terrestrial planets, and the heating charms in the lower section of the hall were malfunctioning again. Frederick watched the boy shiver for exactly 1 minute. Then he sighed, a sound that was less an expression of annoyance and more a resignation to his own nature. He poured the hot water into 2 metal cups. He dropped a tea bag into each earth-gray tea, smelling of bergamot and rain. "Here," Frederick said. His voice was low, gravelly, lacking the melodic lilt of the fae or the commanding resonance of the wolves. The avian boy jumped, his large black eyes widening. "For me?" "You are vibrating loud enough to crack the table," Frederick said. "Drink. It helps with the thermal regulation." The boy took the cup with trembling claws. "Thank you. I am Roran. I am from the Dust Nebulae." "Frederick, Earth." "Earth," Roran blinked, taking a sip. "I heard that planet has no magic. How do you survive the eclipse tide there?" "We sleep through it mostly," Frederick lied smoothly. He took a sip of his own tea. It was bitter hot and tasted like home. He was just beginning to relax, letting the warmth seep into his fingers, when a shadow fell over the table. It was not a friendly shadow. It was broad, heavy, and smelled distinctively of wet fur and arrogance. Frederick did not look up. He stared into his tea, watching the steam curl. "Don't engage," he told himself. "You are a ghost. You are furniture." "Well, look at this," a voice boomed. It belonged to a senior from the Lunar Grove pack, a wolfkin with shoulders wide enough to block a hallway. Flanking him were two others, a vampire with a bored, cruel sneer, and a fae who seemed to be finding the whole situation amusing. "The spares are having a tea party," the wolf sneered. He slammed a heavy hand onto the table. The metal cups rattled. Roran shrank back his feathers, flattening against his head. "We are just eating, senior." "Eating." The vampire spoke now, his voice like silk, sliding over a razor blade. "You are eating because we allow you to eat. This is the neutral zone, little bird, and there is a toll for breathing our air." "The toll," the wolf growled, leaning in, "is your meal credits. Hand them over." It was a classic shakedown. The faculty turned a blind eye to it, calling it inter-house dominance asserting rituals. Frederick called it what it was, insecurity masquerading as power. Roran looked terrified. He reached for his badge, his claws fumbling. I only have enough for the week." "Did I ask for your math?" the wolf snarled. He reached out and shoved Roran. It was a casual shove, meant to intimidate rather than injure, but Roran was light and the bench was slick. The avian boy tipped backward, flailing. Frederick's hand moved. He did not catch the boy. That would have drawn attention. Instead, he reached out to steady the cup of tea on the table. But he was a fraction of a second too late. Or perhaps he hesitated. Roran's flailing wing hit Frederick's cup. The metal vessel spun, tipping its contents. Scalding hot gray tea splashed across the table and dripped onto Frederick's worn gray coat. The liquid was hot. Painfully hot. Frederick froze. The wolf laughed. "Look at that, the human wet himself." Roran scrambled up from the floor, apologizing profusely, tears forming in his large eyes. The bullies were laughing now, a cruel, harmonious sound that cut through the chatter of the great hall. Frederick looked at the stains spreading on his sleeve. He looked at the dented kettle, which had been knocked over in the scuffle. He took a breath. He held it for 3 seconds. He exhaled. Hidden, he thought. Stay hidden. "Clean it up, human," the vampire sneered, tossing a dirty napkin at Frederick's face. The napkin fluttered through the air. Frederick caught it. He did not wipe his coat. He folded the napkin once-twice with precise, geometric movements. "You made him drop his tea," Frederick said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a strange frequency, a flatness that cut through the noise of the immediate area. The wolf blinked, looking down at the small human. "What did you say?" Frederick stood up. He was not tall, nor was he imposing. He looked like a man who fixed engines for a living. "I said," Frederick repeated, looking at the wolf's chest, not his eyes, "pick on someone your size." The hall went quiet. It started as a ripple near their table and spread outward. A human standing up to a Lunar Grove senior was not brave. It was suicidal. The wolf bared his teeth. "You want to be a hero mechanic, fine. I will break you first, then the bird." The wolf lunged. It was a fast move powered by magically enhanced muscles. To the average onlooker, it was a blur. To Frederick, it was a sloppy, telegraphed disaster. Weight distribution forward, right foot planted, left shoulder dropped, aiming for a collarbone grapple. Frederick did not use magic. He did not summon a rune or weave a curse. He simply stepped to the left. It was a step of exactly 6 inches. The wolf's momentum carried him into the empty space where Frederick had been. As the wolf passed, Frederick extended his foot, not a kick, just a rigid obstacle placed in the precise path of the wolf's trailing ankle. At the same moment, Frederick's hand shot out. He did not punch. He hooked his fingers into the heavy fabric of the wolf's tunic at the center of gravity and pulled, adding his own rotational force to the wolf's forward motion. Physics took over. The wolf flew. He didn't just trip. He launched, flipping horizontally in the air, before crashing into the vampire standing behind him. The vampire, caught off guard, tried to misstep away, but he was too slow. The mass of the wolf slammed into him, and they both went down in a tangle of limbs and cursed dignity. The Fae, the third member of the trio, hissed and raised a hand, fingers glowing with green fire. "You dare!" Frederick did not wait for the spell. He picked up the metal tray from the table. He didn't swing it like a club. He threw it, skipping it like a stone across water. The edge of the tray struck the Fae's wrist, not hard enough to break bone, but hitting the ulnar nerve with surgical precision. The Fae yelped, the green fire fizzling out as his hand went numb. He clutched his wrist, staring at Frederick in shock. The wolf and the vampire were scrambling to get up, roaring with humiliation. The wolf's eyes were glowing yellow, his muscles swelling as the moon howl instinct began to trigger. Frederick sighed. He walked forward. He did not run. He walked right into the space between them. He kicked the vampire's knee, a sharp, low tap on the patellar tendon. The vampire's leg buckled, dropping him back to the floor. Then, Frederick turned to the wolf, who was rising with a snarl. Frederick stepped inside the wolf's guard, his palm striking the wolf's solar plexus. It wasn't a heavy blow, but it was timed exactly as the wolf inhaled to roar. The air rushed out of the wolf's lungs. The roar died in his throat, replaced by a desperate, wheezing gasp. The wolf crumbled, clutching his chest, his brain unable to process why his body had suddenly stopped working. It had taken 7 seconds. 3 opponents. 7 seconds. 0 magic. Frederick stood over them. He wasn't breathing hard. He wasn't glowing. He looked slightly annoyed, like a man who had been forced to fix a leaky faucet on his day off. He leaned down and picked up his dented kettle from the floor. He wiped a speck of dust from its side. "Tea time is canceled, apparently," he muttered. He looked at Roran, who was staring at him, with his beak wide open. "Come on. The stew here smells like burnt copper anyway." Frederick turned to leave. And that was when he realized the entire great hall was silent. High above the floor, on the obsidian balcony reserved for the signs of the 4 houses, 4 pairs of eyes were watching. Martha, daughter of the nocturne headmaster, lowered her glass of synthetic blood. Her skin was the color of moonlight on snow, and her eyes were sharp, intelligent crimson. She had watched the fight, know the dismantling with a frown that was slowly uncurling into intrigue. "Did you see that?" she whispered. "No wasted movement." He didn't humiliate them. He just turned them off. "Discipline," said Mabel, leaning over the railing. She was the daughter of the Lunar Grove headmaster, her hair a wild mane of silver, her posture tense and predatory. He didn't use rage. A wolf fights with rage. He fought with mathematics. He broke their rhythm. "He didn't show off," Pearl noted, tilting her head. The daughter of the Peridian headmaster had ears that twitched with amusement and a tail that curled lazily around her chair. She was playing with a golden coin, rolling it over her knuckles. Most males would have puffed their chests out after that. He looked bored. "I like him." "He carries a silence," Edith murmured. The Fey daughter of the Astor Conservatory sat in the shadows, her voice sounding like wind chiming through hollow glass. "Did you feel it? When he struck, there was no intent to harm, only an intent to stop. A vow. He is bound by something heavier than gravity." Martha stood up. The silk of her dress whispered like bat wings. "The eclipse tide is coming. The anchor rituals are failing. We have been looking for a candidate for 6 months." "A human," Mabel scoffed, though her eyes remained fixed on Frederick's retreating back. "Father will laugh." "Let him laugh," Martha said. "Did you see any magic? No. That means he is a blank slate. He is not bound to the moon or the blood or the luck or the name. He is neutral ground. He defended the weak, Pearl added, catching her coin in midair. That is the first requirement of the anchor. Edith stood up as well. And he knows the weight of a promise. I saw it in the way he held the kettle. It matters to him. Martha looked at her sisters in arms. Are we agreed? Mabel grunted a yes. Pearl smiled a sharp cat-like smile. Edith nodded slowly. Then let us go, Martha said. We have a wedding to announce. The assembly of welcome was usually a boring affair. The 4 headmasters would give speeches about honor legacy and the importance of not eating the first years. Frederick stood in the back row of the formation, trying to make himself invisible again. It was harder now. Roran was sticking close to him like a lost duckling, and every few seconds a student would turn around to stare at the human who slapped a wolf. Frederick stared at his boots. Just get through the speech, he thought. Then go to the dorm. Request a transfer to the maintenance crew. Fix pipes. Stay low. Students of the Leviathan. The voice of Lord Vesper, the vampire headmaster, boomed across the amphitheater. Welcome to another cycle of the tide. The speeches dragged on. Frederick zoned out mentally, calculating the structural integrity of the archway above the stage. Then the trumpet sounded. Not the usual fanfare, but the deep, resonant horns of the challenge. The crowd gasped. From the 4 cardinal entrances of the stage, 4 figures walked out. Martha in black velvet and crimson. Mabel in leather and silver fur. Pearl in silk that shifted colors like oil on water. Edith in woven vines and starlight. They walked to the center of the stage, interrupting Lord Vesper. The headmasters looked confused. This was not in the script. Martha stepped forward to the microphone. Her red eyes scanned the crowd, thousands of faces blurring together until they locked onto one. Frederick felt a cold shiver run down his spine. No, he thought. Don't look at me. The conquered eclipse approaches, Martha announced, her voice calm, but amplified by the acoustics of the hall to a deafening volume. The barriers are weakening. The 4 houses require an anchor. A murmur ran through the crowd. An anchor was a myth, a ceremonial role from the old stories, a warrior who would bind the magic of the 4 houses together. We have searched for power, Mabel barked, stepping up next to Martha. But power without control is just a wildfire. We have searched for luck, Pearl purred. But luck without purpose is just gambling. We have searched for truth, Edith whispered, her voice carrying further than the shouts of the others. But truth without action is a library of dust. Martha raised a gloved hand and pointed, a single unwavering finger, aimed directly at the back row. We have found a candidate, one who protects the weak, one who strikes with precision, one who walks without the crutch of magic. The crowd parted. Students scrambled away, leaving a wide-open path between the stage and the back row. Frederick stood alone in the clearing, Roran hiding behind his legs. Frederick of Earth, Martha declared. By the ancient laws of the Leviathan, the daughters of the 4 houses claim you. Frederick blinked. Claim me like for detention. No, Pearl laughed, the sound bright and terrifying. For the battle wedding. What? Frederick asked. You are the anchor candidate, Mabel shouted. Prepare to fight for your hand in marriage. Hold on, Frederick said, raising his hands. I think there is a misunderstanding. I am just here for the exchange program. I fix things. I don't do whatever this is. He took a step back. I decline, respectfully. But no. He turned to walk away. And the floor of the Leviathan Ark woke up. It started as a vibration in the soles of his boots. Then lines of light blue, gold, red, silver erupted from the ground beneath his feet. The runes etched into the fossilized bone of the ship began to glow. The light did not attack him. It embraced him. It swirled around his legs, climbing up his gray coat, illuminating the dented kettle in his bag. The entire amphitheater shook. A deep ancient sound like the groan of a waking whale resonated through the bones of everyone present. Except the ark seemed to vibrate. The four headmasters stood up, their faces pale. The magic of the ark never responded to anyone. Not directly, Martha smiled. It was a terrifying smile. The ark has spoken, Frederick. You cannot decline destiny. Frederick looked down at his glowing hands. He looked at the four, terrifyingly beautiful and powerful women on the stage. He looked at the thousands of aliens staring at him in silence. I really, Frederick muttered to himself, should have just let the tea spill. The dormitory room was small, smelling of antiseptic and old metal. It was perfect. Or it would have been if Frederick wasn't currently the most famous person on the ship. He had locked the door. He had pushed the heavy metal dresser in front of the door. He sat on the bed, staring at the wall. It was midnight. A soft thud came from the window. Frederick looked up. They were in space. There shouldn't be anything at the window. A letter sat on the sill. It was sealed with 4 distinct globs of wax red, silver, gold, and green. Frederick walked over and opened the window. The cold ether wind ruffled his hair. He took the letter. He broke the seal. The paper was heavy, expensive parchment. The handwriting was elegant, sharp, and absolutely threatening. To the anchor candidate, you have awakened the ship. This is unfortunate. We hoped for a warrior, not a mechanic. Tomorrow at dawn, the testing begins. The 4 houses will not accept a human easily. You will be hunted. You will be tested. You will be broken. If you run the eclipse tide, we'll swallow the ark before the sun rises. The protective barriers are tied to the anchor now. You leave, we all die. Sleep well, the headmasters. Frederick stared at the letter. He read it twice. He folded it carefully, just as he had folded the napkin in the mess hall. He walked over to his suitcase and pulled out the dented kettle. He placed it on the small desk. He looked at his reflection in the polished metal. His eyes were tired, but beneath the fatigue, there was something else. A spark. A memory of a fire that had burned down a world once before. He touched the scar hidden beneath his shirt, a curved mark over his heart. Well, Frederick whispered to the empty room. If they want to test a mechanic, they better be ready for things to get taken apart. He turned off the light. Darkness swallowed the room, but outside the ether sea churned, waiting for the dawn. The summons did not come with a trumpet blast or a herald. It arrived as a schedule slipped under his door at 4 a.m. The paper was thick, smelling of 4 distinct scents: ozone, pine needles, spiced incense, and something that smelled dangerously like old blood. Frederick sat on the edge of his narrow bunk, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He looked at the paper. It was not a request. It was an itinerary. Day 1, the Nocturne Court. Day 2, the Lunar Grove Run. Day 3, the Peridian Markets. Day 4, the Astor Conservatory. At the bottom, in handwriting that looked like it had been carved with a knife, were the words, "Survival is optional. Punctuality is not." Frederick sighed and reached for his boots. He touched the spot over his heart beneath the gray fabric of his shirt. There was a scar there, a jagged arc of raised white flesh that burned whenever the arc drifted too close to a nebula. It was an old reminder, a reminder of a world that had burned, because the eclipse tide had gone unanswered. He was not here to marry a princess. He was here to ensure the Leviathan Ark did not become another tomb, floating in the dark. But to do that, apparently, he had to survive the galaxy's most aggressive courtship ritual. The Nocturne Court was less a dormitory and more a cathedral of silence. The architecture was all vertical lines and stained glass suspended in a pocket of artificial twilight. Gravity here was lower, allowing the vampire students to glide rather than walk. Martha was waiting for him at the grand entrance. She wore a high-collared coat of midnight blue, her pale hair pulled back in a severe braid. She looked like a statue carved from ice and nobility. "You are late," Martha said. Frederick checked his pocket watch. "It is 6 o'clock exactly." "In the court, we arrive 5 minutes early to acclimate our heart rates," Martha replied, turning on her heel. "Follow me, and do not touch anything. The artifacts here are older than your civilization." Frederick followed her. The silence of the court was heavy. It was not peace. It was the silence of a held breath. Hundreds of vampires moved through the corridors, their eyes tracking him. They did not blink. "The test is simple," Martha said, her voice echoing softly. "You must walk the hall of lineage without breaking the protocol of shadows. If you disturb the atmosphere, the spectral guardians will drain your fluids." "Friendly," Frederick noted. "Necessary," Martha corrected. "We are predators, Frederick. We bind ourselves with rules so we do not devour the world. Every movement must be calculated. Every word must have purpose." They walked. Frederick kept his steps light, matching Martha's gliding pace. He noticed that she did not just walk, she flowed. She anticipated the air currents. As they passed a large obsidian statue, a young servant, a lesser vampire, barely a fledgling, stumbled. He was carrying a heavy silver tray of crystal decanters filled with synthetic blood. The tray tipped. According to the protocol, the servant should have been punished for the disruption. The vampires nearby hissed, their fangs lengthening. Martha stopped, her expression hardening, ready to issue a reprimand for the clumsiness. Frederick did not think about protocols. He saw a center of gravity shifting. He stepped forward, not with a warrior's lunge, but with a mechanic's efficiency. He caught the tray with one hand and steadied the fledgling's shoulder with the other. The crystal decanters rattled but did not fall. Not a drop was spilled. The hallway went dead silent. The fledgling looked up at Frederick with wide, terrified eyes. "I apologize, my lord." Frederick frowned. "Don't call me lord, and adjust your grip. You are holding it too far to the left. It puts strain on your wrist." He released the tray and stepped back into line. Martha was staring at him. Her red eyes were wide. The other vampires looked confused. A human had touched a servant, a breach of caste, but he had preserved the silence and saved the blood. "You helped him," Martha whispered as they resumed walking. "Why, he is of low blood. His mistake was an insult to the hall." "He is a kid carrying 20 pounds of glass on a slippery floor," Frederick said, looking straight ahead. "Gravity does not care about your bloodlines, Martha. If the glass breaks, someone has to clean it up. It is inefficient." Martha stopped. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time that morning. She saw the grease stain on his cuff, the calluses on his hands. She saw a man who did not see hierarchy, only function. "Inefficient," she repeated, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "You are a strange creature, Frederick. You walk through a nest of vipers and worry about the cleaning schedule." "Vipers I can handle," Frederick muttered. "Broken glass in my boots is annoying." The next day the silence was replaced by the roar of the wind. The lunar grove encompassed the upper decks of the Leviathan Ark, where the shielding was thin, and the ether winds howled like dying stars. It was a landscape of artificial forests and jagged metal cliffs. Mabel stood on a ridge flanked by 20 of her packmates. They were shirtless, their bodies painted with lunar sigils. They looked like engines of war built from muscle and fury. "We do not drink tea here, mechanic," Mabel shouted over the wind. She threw a heavy rucksack at his feet. It hit the metal deck with a clang. 50 pounds, we run the perimeter, 10 miles. If you fall behind, we leave you to the frost wraiths." Frederick looked at the bag. He looked at the 10 miles of jagged terrain. "Is there a lunch break?" "Run!" Mabel roared, and the pack took off. They did not run like humans. They ran on all fours, then on two legs, bounding over obstacles. They were chaotic, explosive, driven by the joy of the hunt. Frederick hoisted the bag. He did not sprint. He settled into a jog. Pace, he told himself. Rhythm. Inhale on the left foot. Exhale on the right. The first mile was agony. The ether wind cut through his coat, biting at his skin. The bag rubbed raw against his shoulders. The wolves were already far ahead, howling their mockery. But by the third mile, the wolves began to tire. They had sprinted too hard, burned their energy in bursts of dominance. Frederick kept the same pace. Thud, thud, thud. By the fifth mile, he passed the first straggler, a young wolf gasping for air. Frederick did not stop, but he slowed his breathing loud enough for the boy to hear. In, out, in, out. The boy matched the rhythm, finding a second wind. By the eighth mile, the artificial moon of the Ark began to rise. The light hit Frederick's chest. The scar over his heart flared hot. It felt like a branding iron. The eclipse tide was reacting to the moon. Pain shot down his arm, turning his vision white. He stumbled. Mabel was there. She had circled back. She grabbed his arm, her grip like a vice. "Do not stop," she growled. Her eyes were glowing gold. "The pack does not stop." "I cramped," Frederick lied. His teeth gritted against the burning agony in his chest. Mabel looked at him. She smelled the distress, the scent of burning ozone coming from his skin, but she did not call him out. She saw the sweat freezing on his face and the sheer, stubborn refusal in his eyes. "Lean on me," she ordered. "I can run," Frederick rasped. "Shut up and lean." They finished the last 2 miles together, shoulder to shoulder. When they crossed the finish line, the rest of the pack cheered not for him, but for the run. Mabel dropped him onto the deck. She was panting, her silver hair plastered to her forehead. "You have no speed," she said, wiping her mouth. "You have no strength. But you have endurance. You run like a machine that does not know it is broken." Frederick lay on his back, staring up at the false stars. The pain in his scar was fading to a dull throb. "Is that a compliment?" Mabel looked down at him. For a moment, the predatory edge softened. "In the Lunar Grove survival is the only compliment that matters. You survived." Day 3 was a different kind of battlefield. The Peridian sector was a labyrinth of neon lights, floating casinos, and marketplaces, where you could buy a dream or sell a nightmare. It smelled of exotic spices and expensive perfume. Pearl met him at a cafe that floated on a magnetic cushion. She wore a dress made of shifting optical fibers. She was charming, playful, and terrifyingly sharp. "Eat," she said, pushing a plate of blue pastries toward him. "They are delicious, or poisonous, depending on your luck." "I am not hungry," Frederick said. "Smart boy," Pearl purred. "Now let us take a walk. I want to show you my world." The walk was a gauntlet. Every 10 feet someone stopped them. Merchants offered Frederick rare gems for free. Beautiful dancers brushed against him, slipping notes into his pockets. A gambler offered him a seat at a high-stakes table with a guaranteed win. Pearl watched him with calculating eyes. She was testing his greed. She was testing his ego. "That merchant offered you a star diamond," Pearl noted as they walked away from a shouting jeweler. "It is worth more than your planet. You did not even look at it." "It was a fake," Frederick said. "The refraction index was wrong." And he was holding his breath. People hold their breath when they lie. Pearl laughed, a sound like silver bells. "And the dancer, she whispered that she could give you pleasures beyond imagination." "She was trying to pickpocket my watch," Frederick said, patting his coat. "I moved it to my other pocket before she got close." They reached a quiet balcony overlooking the sector. Pearl leaned against the railing, her tail twitching. The playful mask dropped, revealing a cold, keen intelligence. "You are boring, Frederick," she said. "You have no price. Everyone has a price." "What is yours, Power Glory? A seat on the council?" Frederick looked out at the neon city. "I want a quiet workshop. I want tea that is actually hot. And I want people to stop trying to kill me before breakfast." Pearl stared at him. She stepped closer, invading his personal space. "You are lying." "Am I? Yes. You want something else. I can smell the ambition on you. But it is not for yourself. She tilted her head. You do not lie to deceive. You lie to deflect. That is either very brave or very stupid. Frederick looked at her. Depends on the day. Tuesday is usually my stupid day. Pearl blinked, then burst into genuine laughter. It was not the calculated laugh of a diplomat. It was real. You are impossible. You are a puzzle box that is locked from the inside. I think I am going to enjoy picking you. The final day brought him to the Astor Conservatory. It was a jungle of bioluminescent plants, growing in zero gravity. The air was thick with pollen and magic. The Fae did not build. They grew their world. Edith sat on a throne of woven roots. She did not speak as he approached. In the Fae court, speaking was a binding contract. To accept a drink was to accept servitude. To answer a question was to give away a piece of your name. She poured 2 cups of nectar. She pushed one toward him. Frederick sat. He did not drink. He waited. Hours passed. The silence stretched. Most humans would have fidgeted. They would have spoken to fill the void. Frederick sat perfectly still. He was used to waiting. He had waited 10 years for the chance to stop the eclipse. Finally, Edith spoke. Her voice was like the rustle of dry leaves. You carry a heavy silence, Frederick of Earth. Words are expensive, Frederick replied. Edith smiled. It was a sad, ancient smile. My sisters test your body, your manners, your mind. I test your soul. You are not here for the wedding. Frederick's heart hammered against his ribs. I am here for the scholarship. A lie, Edith whispered. The flowers around them turned a shade darker. But a lie told to protect. I can feel the oath etched into your skin. A promise made to the dead. Frederick stiffened. He unconsciously touched his chest. You see too much. I see what is shown, Edith said. She leaned forward. Her hand hovered over his, not touching, but close enough that he could feel the static charge of her magic. We are all bound, Frederick. I am bound by my name. Martha by her blood. Mabel by the moon. Pearl by the weave. You think you are free because you have no magic. I am not free, Frederick said softly. I am the most bound of all. I just chose my own chains. Edith looked at him with a profound sadness that slowly turned into respect. Then be careful, chainbreaker. The eclipse does not care about your choices. It only cares about your breaking point. She pushed the cup closer. Drink, it is just tea. No magic, no binding, just tea. Frederick looked at her eyes. They were honest. He took the cup. He drank. It tasted of honeysuckle and trust. The peace of the garden did not last. 2 days later, the sirens screamed. It was the eclipse drill, a monthly simulation to prepare the Ark for the coming conquered eclipse. The artificial sky turned blood red. The gravity shifted unpredictably. Frederick was in the main quadrangle heading to his maintenance shift. Students were running to their designated shelters. It was organized chaos. Then the screaming started. It was not a scream of fear. It was a scream of primal rage. Near the central fountain, a student, a hybrid of wolf and some reptilian species, had collapsed. His body was convulsing. The shielding that dampened the eclipse radiation had flickered for a microsecond. Just a technical glitch, but it was enough. The student was suffering from eclipse sickness. His instinct was overriding his mind. He grew 3 feet in height. Scales erupted from his skin. He lashed out his claws, tearing through a stone bench like it was wet paper. Roran, the avian freshman, was frozen in his path. The beast turned eyes burning with mindless hunger and lunged at the bird boy. The teachers were too far away. The security golems were stuck in the crowd. Frederick did not think. The plan, the secrecy, the mission vanished. He ran. He slid across the pavement, placing himself between the beast and Roran. The beast roared and brought a clawed hand down. It was a strike that would decapitate a normal human. Frederick raised his hand. He could not dodge this. He could not redirect this. The physics were impossible. The mass was too great. He had to use it. He reached deep inside, past the fear, past the mechanic, to the core of the star fragment buried in his soul. The dawn flame. He did not unleash a firestorm. He released a spark. A single, concentrated point of absolute light, no bigger than a grain of sand right at the tip of his finger. Ping. The sound was high-pitched, like crystal breaking. The spark met the beast's claw. There was no explosion. Instead, there was a flash of pure white brilliance. It was not the light of a lamp. It was the light of a newborn sun. It cut through the red haze of the eclipse drill. For a second, the entire quadrangle was washed in a whiteness so intense it cast no shadows. The beast stopped. The rage in its eyes evaporated, replaced by sudden, overwhelming clarity. The eclipse sickness was burned out of his neural pathways instantly. The student collapsed, reverting to his normal form, unconscious, but alive. Frederick closed his hands, snuffing the light. He stood there, breathing hard, his hand trembling. Silence. Again. Then a vampire student 10 feet away screamed, clutching his eyes. "My eyes, it burns, he carries the sun." "Light!" another shouted. "He used true light." The crowd began to murmur, the sound rising like a panic wave. True light. Dawn Flame was a legend. It was the antithesis of the Ark's ecosystem. It was dangerous. Frederick backed away, panic rising in his throat. He had blown it. He was exposed. They would dissect him. Then 4 figures stepped out of the crowd. Martha moved first. She stepped in front of Frederick, shielding him from the view of the weeping vampire. "Silence," Martha commanded. Her voice carried the weight of the Nocturne Court. It was a flash grenade, standard-issue survival gear for non-magicals. "Are your eyes so weak that a chemical flare blinds you?" "But it felt like," the student stammered. "It felt like science," Mabel barked, stepping up on Frederick's right. She glared at the crowd. "The human used a tool. Move along, or I will make this drill a live combat session." Pearl slid to his left, giggling. She picked up a shiny piece of metal from the ground, a piece of the broken bench, and held it up. "Look, it reflected the emergency lights. You are all so dramatic. It was a trick of the angle, a very lucky angle." Edith did not speak to the crowd. She turned to Frederick. She placed a hand on his trembling shoulder and whispered a word in the Fey tongue. A weaving spell. Silentium. The memory of the specific frequency of the light began to blur in the minds of the onlookers. They remembered a flash, but the divine, terrifying nature of it faded into a dull headache. "Go," Martha hissed to Frederick, not looking at him. "Get out of here before the headmasters arrive." Frederick looked at them. "Why?" "Because," Mabel grunted, watching the crowd disperse. "We do not let our anchor sink." "And because," Pearl added, winking, though her eyes were serious, "we are curious to see what else you are hiding." Frederick ran. That night, the dormitory felt like a prison cell. Frederick paced. He checked the locks. He checked his kettle. He checked the scar. They knew. They had to know. You couldn't fake Dawn Flame. A knock came at the door. Not a demand. A polite tap. Frederick hesitated, then opened it. The 4 of them stood there. No entourage. No guards. Just 4 girls in casual robes, looking tired and distinctly unroyal. Martha held a bottle of wine. Pearl held a basket of food. Mabel looked like she wanted to punch something but was settling for leaning against the wall. Edith held a small, glowing flower. "We are coming in," Martha said. "And you are going to explain why you have a star in your pocket." They sat on his floor. It was cramped. It was... Frederick sat on the bed. He told them. Not everything. Not the mission to become the human seat. But he told them about his home, about the eclipse that came and never left, about the oath. "I am not a threat to the Ark," Frederick said, his voice hoarse. "I am here to fix the lock on the tide. That is all." Mabel looked at him, ripping a piece of bread with her teeth. "You are an idiot. You saved a lizard boy and risked blowing your cover. For what? He was a stranger." "He was scared," Frederick said. "When you are scared, you are not a stranger. You are just someone who needs help." Silence settled over the room, but this time it was warm. It was the silence of a shared secret. Pearl looked at Frederick, her eyes soft. "You really are different. Most men want to conquer the Ark. You just want to keep it afloat." "I think," Edith whispered, placing the glowing flower on his nightstand, "that is why the floor lit up." The romance was not a firework, it was a slow gravity. Martha brushed his arm as she poured the wine. Mabel let her knee rest against his leg. Pearl stopped trying to trick him and started listening to him. Edith looked at him as if he were the only real thing in a world of illusions. They stayed until dawn. For the first time, Frederick did not feel like a spy. He felt like he had a crew. 2 days later, the reprieve ended. The message appeared on all the public screens of the Ark. It was an official decree from the Council of Headmasters. The trial of 4. Due to the urgency of the conquered eclipse, the final testing of the anchor candidate is accelerated. Time, tomorrow at high noon. Location, the belly of the Ark. Frederick stood in the hallway reading the screen. Roran was beside him, looking pale. "That's impossible," Roran squeaked. "The trial of 4 is supposed to happen during the eclipse, not before. And the belly, that's the reactor core, it's unstable." Frederick narrowed his eyes. The schedule had been changed. Someone was pushing the timeline. Someone wanted him to fail, or worse, someone wanted the ritual to start before the protections were ready. Martha appeared beside him. She looked grim. "This is not my father's doing," she said quietly. "He values tradition. Rushing the trial is heresy." "Then who?" Frederick asked. "Someone who is afraid," Martha said, "or someone who is very, very hungry." She handed him a small object. It was a communication crystal tuned to the frequency of the 4 girls. "Be ready, mechanic," she said. "Tomorrow we do not just test you. We go to war with you." Frederick took the crystal. He looked at the screen, at the ominous red letters counting down the hours. The rising action was over. The climax was knocking on the door, and it sounded like the heartbeat of a dying god. The belly of the Leviathan Ark was not built. It was grown. Down here, miles beneath the polished marble of the Nocturne Court and the wind-swept steel of the Lunar Grove, the ship remembered that it used to be alive. The walls were not metal, but calcified bone curving in massive rib-like arches that dripped with condensation. The air was thick, humid, and smelled of ozone and ancient musk, heavy beast. Frederick adjusted his collar. He felt like he was walking into the stomach of a sleeping god, which technically he was. "This is excessive," Frederick muttered to himself. "Even for a school. A simple written exam would have sufficed." Beside him, Martha walked with a rigidity that betrayed her anxiety. She was dressed in ceremonial armor, black leather, reinforced with silver filigree. "The trial of 4 is not an exam, Frederick. It is a synchronization. We must prove that our houses can harmonize before the eclipse tide breaks us." "And if we don't harmonize?" Frederick asked. "Then the ether pressure in this chamber crushes us into a very small, very dense cube," Pearl chimed in. She was skipping, but her tail was lashed tight against her leg, a sign of extreme feline agitation. "No pressure, though, or rather literally all the pressure." They reached the center of the chamber. It was a circular platform suspended over a drop that disappeared into violet darkness. Below them, The Ark's core pulsed a massive beating heart of raw magic that kept the fossilized ship drifting through the stars. The audience was already there. High above, on the bone ridges, the elite of the four houses looked down. Vampires in velvet, wolves in furs, cats in silks and fae in woven light. And seated on four thrones carved from the Leviathan spine were the headmasters. Frederick felt their eyes. They were heavy judging. They were waiting for the human mechanic to break. "Places," Edith whispered. She looked pale. The magic down here was loud, a cacophony of names and oaths echoing off the walls. For a fae who heard the truth in every sound, it must have been deafening. They took their positions, 5 points on a circle. Fire, water, earth, air, and the void in the center. Frederick stood in the center. "Begin the resonance," Lord Vesper, the vampire headmaster, commanded from above. His voice boomed like thunder trapped in a cave. The four girls raised their hands. Martha began to chant in the high, sharp tongue of the vampires. Blood runes, crimson and glowing, spiraled up from the floor. Mabel threw her head back and let out a low, throat-vibrating growl. The moon sigils ignited silver and cold. Pearl tossed a handful of golden dice into the air. They didn't fall. They spun, creating a web of probability shining with amber light. Edith sang a single pure note. The true names of the air molecules vibrated, turning the atmosphere into visible ripples of emerald green. The magic rushed toward Frederick. This was the test. He was the anchor. He had to take these four distinct clashing energies and ground them. He had to be the lightning rod. Frederick closed his eyes. He reached for the mechanic part of his brain. "Don't fight it," he told himself. "It is just energy, voltage, amperage, resistance. Root the red to the ground. Root the silver to the capacitor." He felt the power hit him. It was heavy, crushing. But he held it. He distributed it. He breathed. For one glorious minute it worked. The five of them glowed in unison, a perfect ring of multicolored light. The ark hummed in approval. The vibration in the floor smoothed out. Then the rhythm broke. It was not a mistake by the girls. It was not a failure of Frederick's focus. It was a sound, a dissonance. Somewhere in the darkness below the platform, a counter-chant began. It was low, almost subsonic, slipping in between the beats of the ritual, like a knife between ribs. Frederick's eyes snapped open. "Something is wrong." "Hold the line!" Martha shouted, her brow furrowed. "The pressure is spiking." "It's not pressure," Frederick yelled over the rising roar of the core. "It's a signal. Someone is jamming the frequency." The counter-chant grew louder. It was hateful. It was chaotic. It was the sound of a lock being smashed open. Suddenly, the violet light of the core beneath them turned a sickly, bruised purple. The heartbeat of the ark went a rhythmic thump, 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 and then the eclipse tide arrived. Not outside in the sky, but right here, channeled directly into the belly of the ark. The shielding failed. The eclipse sickness hit the chamber like a physical shockwave. It happened instantly. The polite, civilized veneer of the academy shattered. Martha screamed. It was not a human scream. Her jaw unhinged, her fangs lengthening into needle-like daggers. The blood runes surrounding her turned from a protective circle into a cage of jagged spikes. Her eyes rolled back, consumed entirely by the red of the hunger. She looked at the audience above. Not as classmates, but as livestock. Mabel dropped to all fours. Her bones cracked and shifted, reshaping under the skin. Her uniform tore as muscles exploded in size. She was no longer a student. She was the alpha of the Lunar Grove, and the only law she knew was the hunt. She snarled at Pearl, salivating. Pearl tried to back away, but the luck web collapsed. The golden dice turned black. Gravity seemed to warp around her. She slipped, her foot twisting. A stalactite fell from the ceiling, missing her by an inch. The universe had turned against her. Every probability was now a disaster. Edith fell to her knees, clutching her ears. Blood ran from her nose. The true names were screaming. The air itself was lying to her. She opened her mouth to sing a countersong, but only a discordant shriek came out. The audience above was not spared. Screams erupted from the galleries as the eclipse radiation hit the onlookers. Vampires hissed, wolves howled, and the civilized society of the Ark began to dissolve into a slaughterhouse. Frederick stood in the center of the storm. He was human. The eclipse did not turn him into a monster. It just made him feel small. It made him feel like a speck of dust in a hurricane. He looked at Martha. She was crouching, ready to pounce on a terrified first-year student, cowering near the edge of the platform. He looked at Mabel. She was tearing at the floor, mindless with rage. "Martha!" Frederick shouted. "Mabel, listen to me!" They did not hear him. To them he was just meat. The Ark groaned. The structural bones were vibrating. If this continued for another minute, the Leviathan would tear itself apart. Frederick looked at his hands. They were shaking. He had a choice. He could run. He could use the chaos to slip away, find a pod, and launch himself into the ether. He would survive. He would keep his secret. Or he could stay. And to stay, he had to burn. He looked at Martha, who was fighting the urge to kill, tears of blood streaming down her face as she battled her own instinct. He looked at Pearl, who was curled in a ball, waiting for the ceiling to crush her. I swore, Frederick thought. The scar on his chest felt like it was opening up. I swore I would not let the lights go out again. "Tea time is cancelled," Frederick whispered. He reached into his shirt and ripped the fabric away, exposing the scar. He stopped suppressing the energy. He stopped being the mechanic who fixed things with wrenches and tape. He became the engine. "Mabel!" Frederick roared. It wasn't a shout. It was a command reinforced by the dawn spark. But this was no longer a spark. A pillar of white fire erupted from Frederick's chest. It was blinding. It was absolute. It was the color of a star born in a vacuum. It shot upward, piercing the gloom of the belly, smashing through the violet haze of the eclipse. The fire did not burn the air. It did not scorch the stone. It burned intent. It incinerated the chaotic signal, jamming the ritual. The sheer brightness of it stunned the room. The monsters on the ridges recoiled, covering their eyes. Frederick stepped forward. The light poured from him, turning his skin translucent, revealing the veins of gold fire running through his body. He grabbed Mabel by the scruff of her neck. She snarled and snapped at him, her jaws strong enough to crush steel. Frederick did not flinch. He looked directly into her wild yellow eyes. The dawn flame flared, burning away the red haze of the madness. "You are not a beast," Frederick said, his voice overlapping with the sound of chiming bells. "You are the shield. Stand up." Mabel blinked. The fur receded slightly. The intelligence returned to her eyes. She gasped, dropping to her knees, shaking. Frederick turned to Martha. She was trembling, her claws digging into her own arms to stop herself from attacking. He walked to her. The light around him was so intense, it hurt to look at, but he offered his hand. "Martha," he said. "Get back," she hissed, her voice distorted. "I will drain you dry. I am a monster." "No," Frederick said. "You are a leader, and leaders do not eat their crew." He grabbed her hand. The contact sizzled. The chaotic hunger in her blood met the absolute order of the dawn flame. For a second, Martha screamed in pain, but then the hunger vanished, vaporized by the light. She collapsed against him, sobbing dry, tearless sobs. Frederick pulled her up. He dragged them toward the center. He grabbed Pearl, who was paralyzed with fear, and Edith, who was catatonic. He forced them into a tight circle. "Connect!" Frederick shouted. "Now, while the light holds—" "We can't," Pearl wept. "The luck is gone, the rhythm is broken." "I am the rhythm!" Frederick yelled. The light was intensifying. It was becoming painful for him now. He felt his own life force being converted into fuel. "I am the beat, follow me." He forced the connection. He became the hub, blood moon, luck, name. He slammed them together, welding the four broken magics with the fire of the dawn. The antagonistic chant from the dark spiked, trying to break his hold. Frederick gritted his teeth. Blood began to trickle from his nose. The strain was immense. It felt like he was holding up the sky. "I am terrified," Frederick screamed. The confession ripped out of him. It wasn't part of the plan. It was the truth. "I am terrified that I am just a tool. I am terrified that you will use me and throw me away like a broken part." The raw honesty of it cut through the magical noise. Martha, stabilizing in the light, looked at him. She saw the man burning himself alive to save them. She saw the fear behind the power. "Then be a person," Martha shouted back, gripping his hand tighter. "Be flawed, be scared, but be ours by choice." "We do not marry weapons," Mabel roared, adding her strength to the circle. "We marry men who have the guts to bleed." Edith began to sing again, her voice finding the harmony in Frederick's light. "Your name is not Anchor. Your name is Frederick, and you are here." The circle began to spin. The violet light of the eclipse was being pushed back inch by the blinding white of the dawn flame. The tension was unbearable. They were on the edge of explosion. Pearl looked up. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the white fire. "Cute confession," she yelled over the roar of the magic. "Really touching. Can we survive first and do the therapy later?" Frederick let out a sharp, hysterical laugh. "Deal." He released the final limiter. Break. The fourfold anchor snapped into place. It wasn't a soft click. It was a thunderclap. A shockwave of white light exploded outward from the 5 students. It hit the walls of the belly. It hit the audience. It hit the core of the ark. It didn't hurt. It washed. The eclipse sickness vanished instantly. The vampire students in the stands woke up from their blood trance. The wolves reverted to humanoid forms, looking confused and naked. The cracks in the ceiling fused shut. The counterchant in the darkness was silenced, choked out by the overwhelming pressure of absolute order. The light held for 10 seconds. 10 seconds of perfect, blinding silence, where the entire ark stood still in the presence of a power that hadn't been seen in 1,000 years. Then it faded. Frederick collapsed. He didn't hit the floor. Martha and Mabel caught him. He was smoking. Literally. Wisps of steam were rising from his gray coat. His skin was gray, drained of all color. The chamber was silent. But this time it wasn't the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of shock. On the walls of the belly, the ancient calcified ribs of the Leviathan, there were marks. Huge scorched symbols, burned into the bone. They were not vampire runes. They were not wolf sigils. They were geometric, precise, mathematical. They were the sigils of the dawn, the mark of the human seat. "He is alive, Dr. Eris." The head of the medical ward shouted from the ridge, his scanning monocle zooming in. "But his vitals are erratic." Frederick coughed. He tasted copper and ash. He opened one eye. The 4 girls were hovering over him. They looked battered, their ceremonial clothes torn, but they were themselves again. "Did we win?" Frederick rasped. "You show off," Pearl whispered, wiping soot from his forehead. Her hand was shaking. "You absolute suicidal show-off." "You burned the curse," Edith said softly. She looked at the walls. "And you signed your name on the ship." Frederick followed her gaze. He saw the scorch marks. "Ah," he whispered. "That is going to be hard to buff out." He tried to sit up, but Martha pushed him back down. Her touch was gentle, but her eyes were fierce. "Stay down," she ordered. "Look." The headmasters were descending from their thrones. They did not look happy. They did not look relieved. They looked like people who had just realized their pet cat was actually a tiger. Lord Vesper landed on the platform first. He walked over to the group. His cape swirled around him. He looked at the scorch marks, Then, at Frederick. He did not clap. "The eclipse tide has been pushed back," Lord Vesper announced. His voice was cold. "The Ark is safe." He looked down at Frederick. "But the laws of the Covenant have been broken. A human has wielded the dawn flame. This is forbidden." "He saved us," Mabel snarled, standing up to face her father. "He saved everyone." "He saved the ship," Vesper corrected. "But he endangered the hierarchy." The other 3 headmasters landed. The atmosphere was thick with threat. "The saboteur is still here," Frederick whispered, struggling to speak. "Someone amplify the signal." "We will investigate the sabotage," the Fey headmistress said dismissively. "But first we must deal with the anomaly." Lord Vesper pointed a gauntleted finger at Frederick. "Frederick of Earth, you are hereby summoned to the Covenant Council. You will explain how you possess a power that belongs to the dead gods, and you will pray that we do not decide to extinguish it." Martha stepped in front of Frederick, then Mabel, then Pearl, then Edith. A wall of 4 daughters against 4 fathers. "If you take him," Martha said, her voice low and dangerous, "you take the anchor, and next time the eclipse comes we will not hold the line." Vesper stared at his daughter. A tense standoff stretched between generations. "Very well," Vesper said finally. "He remains under house arrest in the Nocturne Tower until the council convenes. But know this, boy." Vesper leaned in, his eyes glowing red. "You may have locked the tide, but you have opened a door that cannot be closed. The galaxy is watching you now." The headmasters turned and swept away. Frederick let his head fall back against the cold stone floor. He felt Pearl slip her hand into his. "Can we survive first?" Frederick muttered, repeating Pearl's words. "I think we failed that part." "We survived the magic," Pearl whispered, squeezing his hand. "Now we just have to survive the politics." Frederick closed his eyes. The adrenaline was fading, leaving only pain and a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. But for the first time, the darkness behind his eyelids didn't feel lonely. He could feel the pulse of the 4 girls around him, a rhythm he had forged in the fire. He was in trouble, massive, galaxy-spanning trouble. But as he drifted into unconsciousness, Frederick smiled. At least the tea time hadn't been boring. The Nocturne Tower was not designed for comfort. It was designed for brooding. The walls were made of black obsidian that seemed to absorb light, and the windows were narrow slits, looking out over the churning purple clouds of the ether sea. Frederick sat in a high-backed velvet chair that was clearly sized for someone with a much longer torso, staring at a plate of cold ash cakes. He was technically a guest. Practically, he was a prisoner. The door creaked open. It was not a guard. It was Martha. She looked exhausted, the pristine elegance of her vampire nobility frayed at the edges. She carried a sheaf of parchment thick enough to stop a crossbow bolt. "How is the trial of public opinion?" Frederick asked, not looking up. "Polarized," Martha said, dropping the papers onto the table. "Half the student body wants to build a statue of you. The other half wants to eject you out of an airlock to appease the spirits. There is very little middle ground." Frederick picked up a piece of paper. It was a formal complaint from the Council of Elders citing unauthorized use of divine luminance, resulting in severe eye strain and existential dread among the faculty. "They are calling it the Dawn Flame," Martha said softly, sitting opposite him. "Frederick, you did not tell us it was that strong. You burned the corruption out of the Ark's core. That is not something a mechanic does. That is something a god does." "I am not a god," Frederick snapped, the exhaustion finally cracking his voice. "I am a guy who fixes things. Gods don't have back pain. Gods don't get detained in a tower because they saved everyone's lives." "You are a threat to the hierarchy," Martha replied, her voice turning clinical, though her eyes remained warm. "The 4 houses rely on a balance of power. Vampire, Wolfcat, Fey. We are the pillars. You, you are a sledgehammer hitting the foundation. You proved that a species we consider inert, can overpower the eclipse. It scares them. Good, Frederick muttered. Fear makes people check their safety protocols. It also makes them bite, Martha warned. My father is furious. He is trying to invoke the ancient statutes to claim you as a ward of the Nocturne Court. Essentially, he wants to own you. If you belong to us, your power belongs to us. And, let me guess, Frederick said, the wolves want to execute me as a rival alpha. The cats want to sell tickets to see me glow. And the fae want to bind me to a tree for 1,000 years. Roughly accurate, Martha conceded. But we are fighting back, she pointed to the stack of papers. I have buried the council in bureaucratic objections. I cited the guest right of the Star Traveler, a law from the First Era that hasn't been used in 3,000 years. It states that anyone who saves the Ark from structural collapse is granted temporary immunity from caste laws. They are spending days just translating the text. Frederick looked at her. You are buying time. I am buying your life, Martha said. Mabel is downstairs, by the way. She has been standing guard at the main gate for 12 hours. She told the guards that if anyone tries to enter without her permission, she will dismantle them. And since she is the headmaster's daughter, they cannot stop her. Frederick felt a lump in his throat. She doesn't have to do that. She thinks she does, Martha said. She feels responsible. She dragged you into the Lunar Grove run. She thinks she pushed you too hard. She didn't push me, Frederick said quietly. I jumped. The confinement was loose enough that Frederick was allowed to walk within the secure perimeter of the Nocturne Gardens, provided he was escorted. The gardens were beautiful in a morbid way. The flowers were pale and only bloomed in starlight. The trees had bark like iron. As Frederick walked, he felt the eyes. Students from other houses were gathered at the heavy iron gates watching him. There he is! A young face shouted. The Lightbringer. Monster! A wolf senior yelled back. He is an abomination. He broke the ritual. Sign my forehead where... first-year catgirl, screamed, waving a marker. Frederick pulled his collar up. He hated it. He hated the worship as much as the hatred. Neither side saw him. To the haters, he was a weapon to be destroyed. To the fans, he was a weapon to be fetishized. He was an object. A thing. Ignore them, a voice whispered from the branches above. Frederick looked up. Pearl was hanging upside down from an ironwood tree, her tail swinging lazily. She dropped down, landing silently beside him. She held a napkin filled with pastries. You look like you haven't eaten since the trial, Pearl said, shoving a tart into his hand. Eat. It is lemon and despair. My favorite. How did you get in? Frederick asked, taking a bite. It was actually delicious. I am a cat, Pearl said, as if that explained physics. And I have been busy. While Martha is drowning them in paper, I have been using the Peridian spy network. The rumors are interesting. What rumors? The sabotage at the belly of the Ark, Pearl said, her playful tone vanishing. It wasn't random. The jamming signal, it came from inside the system. Someone with high-level clearance modified the acoustic dampers to amplify the eclipse resonance instead of blocking it. Headmaster, Frederick asked, feeling a chill. Maybe, Pearl said. But here's the strange part. We found traces of similar sabotage at 3 other points in the ship. Minor incidents over the last month. A gravity lift failing. A heating unit exploding. All dismissed as maintenance errors. Frederick stopped chewing. Where? Sector 7, Rib 4. Sector 9, Rib 12. And the main intake valve near the industrial sector. Frederick's mind began to race. He wasn't thinking like a hero. He was thinking like a mechanic. Those aren't random spots. The ribs of the Leviathan aren't just structural, they are conductive. They carry the magical ley lines from the core to the shielding. He crouched down, grabbing a stick, and drawing a diagram in the dirt. If you weaken the ribs here, here, and then, overload the core. You don't just break the shield, Pearl finished, her eyes widening. You detach it. You detach the control mechanism, Frederick corrected. The Ark is a biological ship. It bonds with the headmasters through the anchor ritual. But if you sever those connections during an eclipse, the Ark becomes a free agent, Pearl whispered. A blank slate. Or, Frederick said darkly, it becomes ready for a new owner. Someone who has their own ritual ready to graft onto the system. A coup, Pearl realized. Not just of the government. Of the ship itself. That evening, Edith arrived. She did not come through the door or over the wall. She stepped out of a shadow in the corner of his room, smelling of rain and old books. I have drafted a pact, Edith said without preamble. She placed a scroll on his desk. It is a temporary guardianship accord. It states that you are currently under the protection of the Astor Conservatory for the purpose of academic research into anomalous energy. If you sign it, my mother cannot vote to execute you without violating her own house's treaty. You are turning me into a science project to save me, Frederick asked. I am turning you into a question, Edith said softly. The Fae cannot destroy a question until it is answered. It is the only loophole I could find. She looked at him, her large, iridescent eyes filled with worry. But Frederick's words are only wind. The headmasters are losing patience. They want the battle wedding to proceed, but they want it rigged. They want you to pledge fealty to one house before the ceremony. They want to own the Dawn Flame. I won't pledge, Frederick said. I am not property. Then they will kill you, Edith said simply. Or they will let the eclipse take you. You need to give them something. A compromise. I don't do compromises, Frederick said. I do repairs, and you don't repair an engine by negotiating with the rust. He stood up and paced the room. I need to see the ribs. The damaged sections Pearl found. I need to prove that this isn't about me. It is about the Ark being hijacked. You can't leave the tower, Edith said. The guards are doubled. Frederick looked at his suitcase in the corner. I don't need to leave to see. I have the schematics in my head, but I need a key. He walked over to the suitcase and pulled out the dented metal kettle. Edith frowned. The teapot, Frederick. This is not the time for a beverage. It's not just a pot, Frederick said. He placed it on the small heating coil in his room. My grandfather gave this to me. He was a star navigator before the eclipse destroyed our world. He said it was made of the stuff that remembers. He turned the heat up. The water inside began to boil. Steam hissed. In part 1, Frederick muttered, I spilled tea. The bullies knocked it over. But when the water hit the table, it sizzled. Like it was reacting to the Ark. He waited. The metal of the kettle began to heat up. Usually tin would just get hot. But this metal changed. As the temperature rose, faint glowing lines began to appear on the battered surface of the kettle. They weren't scratches. They were runes. Edith gasped. Those are Leviathan markings. High speech. How does a human appliance have high speech markings? Because it's not tin, Frederick said, watching the glowing blue lines interlocking. It is a piece of shedding, a scale from a Leviathan. My grandfather didn't just survive the old world. He knew the creatures that built it. He rotated the kettle. The lines formed a map. A three-dimensional star chart, but overlaid with the anatomy of the Ark. Look, Frederick pointed. The glowing lines converged on 4 specific points on the map. The exact points Pearl had mentioned. The damaged ribs. They aren't just breaks, Frederick said. They are insertion points. Someone is trying to insert a new command code into the Ark's nervous system. He poured the hot water out into the sink, the steam filling the room. The map faded as the metal cooled, but the truth remained. The battle wedding isn't just a ceremony, Frederick realized. It is the login screen. The 4 headmasters think they are renewing their admin rights. But whoever sabotaged those ribs, they have rewired the system. When the headmasters try to connect during the wedding, the feedback will fry them. It will lock them out. "And the Ark will be open," Edith whispered. "For whom?" "For the one who knows the back door," Frederick said. "For the one who has been pushing for the wedding to happen now, right when the ribs are weakest." A name floated into his mind. Not a headmaster. Someone who knew the rituals, but hated the treaties. Someone who had been there in the belly of the Ark watching. "Archdean Malachi," Frederick said. "The advisor to the council. The one who set the schedule." The realization hit them like a physical blow. But they were stuck in a tower, and the enemy was holding the keys to the kingdom. That night, the 4 girls gathered in Frederick's room again. They had snuck in, using a combination of Pearl's lock-picking, Mabel's intimidation of the night shift, and Edith's illusion spells. "Malachi Duskweaver," Martha said, her face pale. "He was a candidate for headmaster 20 years ago. He was rejected because his views on the Covenant were radical. He believes the Ark should be a weapon of conquest, not a sanctuary." "If he takes control," Mabel growled, pacing the small room, "he will turn the Leviathan into a warship. He will use the eclipse energy to fire on other systems." "And he needs the battle wedding to happen," Frederick said. "He needs the 4 of you to connect to the anchor. That is the trigger. Once the connection is open, the sabotaged ribs will reverse the flow. Instead of you grounding the Ark will drain you. It will kill you." Silence filled the room. The weight of the betrayal was heavy. "So we don't go," Pearl said, her voice trembling. "We boycott the wedding." "If we don't go," Frederick said, "the Concord eclipse happens at dawn. The shielding fails naturally. The Ark dies. Malachi wins either way. If we go, he traps us. If we don't, the ship sinks." Frederick looked at the 4 of them. Martha, the noble leader who was tired of rules. Mabel, the warrior who was scared of hurting people. Pearl, the trickster who wanted to be taken seriously. Edith, the truth-teller, who was forced to live in silence. They were looking at him, not as a hero, not as a monster, but as the only person who could see the machine for what it was. "I have to run," Frederick said suddenly. The girls flinched. The disappointment in Mabel's eyes was heartbreaking. "I have to run," Frederick repeated, "away from this room. But not away from the Ark." He walked over to the window, looking out at the dark silhouette of the Leviathan's spine. "I wanted to hide," Frederick confessed. "I came here to be invisible, because in my old world the people who stood up died. My grandfather died trying to warn them." He turned to face them. "But hiding is just waiting to die slowly. You 4, you made me care. You made me angry. You made me want to fix this stupid, broken, beautiful ship." He took a step toward them. "Malachi rewired the system to reject the 4 houses. He expects the anchor to be a passive point of connection, a battery." Frederick touched the scar on his chest. "But he doesn't expect the anchor to have an opinion. He doesn't expect the anchor to be a mechanic who knows how to override a faulty circuit." "What are you saying?" Martha asked. "I am saying," Frederick said, a grim smile forming on his face, "that I am accepting the proposal. We are going to the battle wedding." "But the trap," Edith started. "We trigger the trap," Frederick said. "We let him think he has won. We let him open the connection, and then—" He picked up his kettle. "Then I pour the hot water. I use the dawn flame not to block the eclipse, but to burn out his backdoor virus. I will rewrite the ownership of the Ark in real time." "That will kill you," Mabel said, grabbing his shirt. "The strain, Frederick, you are human. You can't channel that much power." "I won't be doing it alone," Frederick said. He looked at them. "I need a fourfold anchor. Real connections, not political treaties, not arranged marriages. I need you to trust me. Not as a lord or an alpha or a husband, but as a partner." He held out his hand. "No ownership," Frederick said. "No, you belong to me. We belong to the mission. We belong to the choice." Martha looked at his hand. She took a deep breath. She stripped off her glove, revealing her pale, cold hand. She grasped him. "To the choice," Martha said. Mabel growled softly and placed her large, warm hand on top. "To the pack." Pearl placed her hand light and quick. "To the odds." Edith placed hers, her touch vibrating with magic. "To the truth." The pact was sealed. Not with magic, but with intent. The falling action was rushing toward the ground now. The next morning, 2 hours before dawn, the ultimatum arrived. It was a holographic projection that appeared in the center of the Nocturne Tower, and simultaneously in every room on the Ark. The 4 headmasters stood in a row, looking grave. "People of the Ark," Lord Vesper spoke, "the eclipse approaches. To ensure our survival, the battle wedding will commence at first light in the heart chamber. Frederick of Earth has been designated the sacrifice, I mean the anchor." The slip was subtle, but Frederick heard it. Sacrifice. They didn't expect him to survive either. They were willing to burn him out to buy another year of safety. But then a second message arrived. This one was analog. A simple paper airplane flown by a wind spirit, landing on Frederick's windowsill. Frederick unfolded it. The handwriting was jagged, chaotic. "My dear mechanic, I know you found the ribs. Clever boy. Come to the altar. Step into the light. You think you are the hero of this story. You think you are the human seat. You are just the fuse, and I am the match. When the light hits you, you will see what your grandfather really was. He wasn't a navigator. He was a thief. And you are holding stolen goods. See you at the wedding. Malachi." Frederick stared at the note. A cold pit opened in his stomach. Stolen goods was the dawn flame, not a gift. Was his legacy a lie? "Frederick," Martha asked, seeing his face. Frederick crumpled the note. He put it in his pocket next to the kettle. "It doesn't matter," Frederick said, his voice hard. "Thief or hero, the job is the same. We have an engine to fix." He grabbed his coat. "Let's go get married," Frederick said, "and then let's start a riot." They walked out of the room. The guards at the door saw Mabel's face and decided that they were very interested in inspecting the ceiling tiles. They moved through the corridors of the sleeping ship. The air was heavy with the coming eclipse. The walls were vibrating. The falling action was over. The pieces were set. The trap was laid, and 5 students were walking straight into the jaws of the Leviathan to see who would bite first. The heart chamber of the Leviathan Ark was not a room designed for the living. It was a cathedral of biology and starlight buried miles beneath the surface of the academy. The walls here were not made of stone or metal, but of a translucent, crystallized organic material that pulsed with a slow, rhythmic thrum, the actual physical heartbeat of the cosmic entity they lived upon. Frederick stood at the entrance, his breath misting in the cold, heavy air. The atmosphere tasted of ozone and ancient dust. Beside him, the 4 daughters of the headmasters stood in a formation that was no longer ceremonial. It was tactical. Martha had drawn a rapier of shadow glass. Mabel's knuckles were white as she clenched her fists. Pearl was spinning a single gold coin between her fingers with nervous energy. And Edith was murmuring a protective mantra under her breath. In the center of the chamber lay the altar of the covenant. It was a massive slab of obsidian, surrounded by the 4 unconscious bodies of the headmasters. They were trapped in pillars of amber light, frozen in expressions of shock. Standing over them, looking remarkably calm for a man committing high treason, was Archdean Malachi Duskweaver. He wore robes of shifting gray, the color of a storm cloud. He held a staff made from a piece of the Ark's own bone, carved with runes that seemed to bleed darkness into the air. "You are late," Malachi said, his voice echoing not just in the room but inside their skulls. "I expected the anchor candidate to be more punctual, though I suppose a mechanic is used to working on everyone else's schedule." Frederick stepped forward, his dented metal kettle hanging from his belt like a grenade. "I was busy reading your fan mail, Malachi." "You write very dramatic notes," Malachi smiled. It was a thin, bloodless expression. "Drama is necessary for history, Frederick. Without drama, it is just bookkeeping. And today we are closing the books on the Old Covenant." He raised the staff. The amber pillars holding the headmasters flared brighter. "The eclipse tide is here," Malachi announced. "Look." Above them, the translucent ceiling of the heart chamber showed the sky. It was no longer the black of space. It was a churning, violent violet. The conquered eclipse had begun. The natural shielding of the Ark was failing, and the raw, chaotic energy of the universe was pressing against the hull. "The four houses have grown weak," Malachi preached, pacing around the altar. "Vampires playing at nobility, wolves playing at soldiers, cats playing at merchants, fae playing at librarians. You have forgotten what the Ark is. It is not a school. It is a leviathan. It is a predator. And it needs a master, not a committee." "So you sabotaged the ribs," Frederick said, keeping his voice level. "You weakened the structural integrity so the headmasters couldn't sink. You locked them out." "I unlocked the potential," Malachi corrected. "I rewired the neural pathways. The Ark is confused. It is in pain. It is looking for a voice to give it orders. And when I merge with the core during the eclipse, I will be that voice." He pointed the staff at Frederick. "But the Ark still craves a sacrifice, a spark to ignite the new engine. That is you, mechanic. You and that stolen fire in your chest." Mabel stepped forward, a low growl vibrating in her chest. "If you think we will let you touch him, you are mistaken, old man." "Oh, the puppy speaks," Malachi sneered. He waved his hand. He didn't cast a fireball. He spoke a word. It was a word of command twisted by the chaotic energy of the eclipse. "Kneel." The air pressure in the room multiplied by 50. Gravity hammered down. Mabel's knees hit the floor with a sickening crack. Martha gasped, forced down by the invisible weight. Pearl and Edith collapsed, struggling to breathe. Frederick felt the weight hit him like a falling building. His bones creaked. His vision swam. But he did not kneel. The scar on his chest burned hot, the dawn flame, acting as an internal strut, holding him upright against the crushing force. Malachi looked impressed. "Resilient, but for how long?" he began to chant. The rhythm of the Ark's heartbeat changed. It sped up, syncing with Malachi's voice. The violet light from above began to bleed into the chamber. "He is rewriting the contract." Edith gasped, blood trickling from her nose. "He is using the eclipse to bypass the consent laws. He is forcing the Ark to accept him as the Alpha." Frederick looked at the girls. They were pinned. He looked at Malachi. The Archdean was protected by layers of ancient wards. A physical attack would be useless. Frederick closed his eyes. "Think like a mechanic. The system is being hacked. You can't stop the hack by hitting the keyboard. You have to cut the power to the terminal." "Edith!" Frederick shouted, straining against the gravity. "The true name of the gravity drive." "What is it?" Edith looked up, her eyes wide. "If I speak, it could shatter the floor." "Speak it!" Edith took a breath. She whispered a word that sounded like the breaking of a glacier. The gravity hold shattered. The girls sprang up, gasping. "Form up!" Martha commanded. Do not let him finish the chant. The battle wedding had begun. But there were no guests, no flowers, and the vows were spells designed to tear reality apart. Martha moved first. She sliced her palm with her rapier, flinging droplets of blood into the air. "Blood binds!" she screamed. The droplets turned into crimson chains, lashing out to wrap around Malachi's staff. Malachi laughed. "Blood is liquid. I am the storm." He twisted the staff, and the blood boiled, turning into steam. Mabel roared, transforming mid-leap. She became a blur of silver fur and muscle, crashing into Malachi's magical barrier. The impact shook the room. She was the battering ram, striking again and again, keeping him off balance. Pearl was dancing on the edge of the fray. She wasn't attacking Malachi directly. She was attacking the environment. She threw her dice at the floor tiles, at the stalactites above Malachi's head. "Oops!" Pearl yelled. "Bad luck." A massive crystal shard fell from the ceiling, aiming for Malachi. He was forced to break his chant to deflect it with a shield of gray energy. "Now!" Frederick yelled. "Get me to the altar." He ran. He didn't have speed magic or strength magic. He ran with human legs, his boots slipping on the organic floor. Malachi saw him. "No, you don't, thief!" Malachi slammed the staff down. The floor rippled. A wave of bone spikes erupted from the ground, racing toward Frederick. Frederick slid. He didn't try to jump over them. He slid under the arc of the wave, the spikes missing his nose by an inch. He reached the altar. He slammed his hand onto the obsidian surface. It was cold, freezing. "Ark!" Frederick shouted. "Listen to me!" The Ark didn't answer. It was screaming in pain, its mind filled with Malachi's chaotic commands. Malachi threw Mabel aside with a blast of wind and turned his full attention to Frederick. "It cannot hear you," Malachi roared. "I have severed the connection. It only knows pain now, and I am the only one who can stop the pain." He raised his hand. A spear of violet eclipse energy formed above his head. He was going to skew Frederick to the altar. "Fred!" Martha screamed, trying to reach him, but Malachi walled her off with a barrier of fire. Frederick looked at the spear. He looked at the chaos. He realized Malachi was right. The Ark couldn't hear him. The noise was too loud. "If the machine is making too much noise," Frederick thought, "you don't yell over it. You create a new frequency." He didn't fight back with force. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the tea kettle. He slammed the dented metal pot onto the sacred obsidian altar. Clang. The sound was pathetic. It was tinny hollow and utterly mundane. But it was real. "This," Frederick said, his voice trembling but clear, "is not a weapon. It is a tool for making tea. It is used to comfort, to warm, to share." He put his hand over his heart. He grabbed the dawn flame. He didn't push it out like a laser. He poured it. He poured the white fire into the kettle, and from the kettle into the altar. "I am not a king," Frederick spoke to the stone. "I am not a master. I am a guest." The white light spread through the black stone. It wasn't violent. It was warm. It flowed like water. Malachi threw the spear. Edith screamed a word of deflection, but she was too far. Pearl did the only thing she could. She untied the luck knot on her wrist, a charm she had been saving for a moment of death. "1 in a million," Pearl shrieked. The spear flew. It aimed for Frederick's heart. At the last microsecond, the intense heat of the dawn flame rising from the altar created a thermal updraft, a simple pocket of hot air. The spear of energy hit the updraft. It deviated by 2 millimeters. It missed Frederick's heart. It grazed his shoulder, tearing through the coat, and flesh searing the skin, but leaving him alive. Frederick grunted in pain, falling to his knees. But his hands stayed on the altar. The white light hit the Ark's core. The screaming stopped. The Ark paused. It felt something it hadn't felt in eons. It didn't feel a command. It felt an offer. Consent. The thought rippled through the chamber. Malachi froze. What are you doing? Why is the chant failing? Frederick stood up, blood dripping from his shoulder. He looked at the girls. He wants to own the ship, Frederick rasped. He wants to own the power. He thinks the battle wedding is a transfer of a deed. Frederick looked at Martha. Her eyes were terrified, but she was holding the line. I don't promise myself to this ship, Frederick shouted, his voice amplified by the Ark itself now. And I don't promise myself to you, Malachi, or to the headmasters. He looked at the four girls. I am not property, I am a partner. He turned to the girls. If we do this, we do it my way. No chains, no oaths of servitude. We stay because we want to. We protect because we choose to. I choose, Martha yelled, dropping her barrier and running to the circle. I choose, Mabel roared, limping to his side. I choose, Edith whispered, joining them. I choose, Pearl said, panting. And I choose a long vacation after this. They grabbed hands. The fourfold anchor formed again. But this time, it wasn't a rigid geometric shape. It was fluid. It was alive. Malachi screamed. No, you cannot rewrite the ancient laws. Order requires submission. Order, Frederick said, his eyes glowing with the blinding white of the dawn, requires maintenance, and you are obsolete. Burn! The dawn flame exploded. It didn't destroy the room. It flooded the neural network of the Leviathan Ark. It chased Malachi's virus through the ribs, through the spine, through the nerves. Wherever it found Malachi's command code, it didn't just delete it. It burned it with the concept of free will. Malachi shrieked as his staff shattered. The connection backlashed. The eclipse energy he had been channeling turned on him. Since the Ark now rejected his command, the energy had nowhere to go but back into the conduit. Malachi was blasted backward. He flew across the chamber and slammed into the far wall, knocked unconscious by the sheer force of his own rejected magic. The violet light in the ceiling vanished. The sky turned a calm, deep velvet black. The stars returned. The conquered eclipse was locked, not by a wall, but by a heartbeat. The chamber fell silent. Frederick let go of the altar. His legs gave out. Martha caught him. She lowered him gently to the floor. Her dress was ruined, her hair was a mess, and she looked more beautiful than any painting in the nocturne court. You are bleeding, she whispered, pressing her hand to his shoulder. I'm fine, Frederick wheezed. Just structural damage. Needs a patch. Pearl crawled over, looking at the unconscious Malachi. So we fought for consent. How scandalous. Frederick managed a weak grin. Human specialty. We are very big on reading the terms and conditions. The pillars holding the headmasters faded. Lord Vesper and the others collapsed, groaning, as they woke up from the stasis. They looked around. They saw the defeated Archdean. They saw the stable sky, and they saw a human bleeding on the floor, surrounded by their daughters. Lord Vesper walked over. He looked old. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a weary confusion. The Ark, Vesper murmured. It feels different. It is quiet. It is not demanding blood. We renegotiated the contract, Martha said, standing up to face her father. She didn't bow. The Ark serves us, and we serve it. Mutual respect. No more sacrifices. Vesper looked at Frederick. He looked at the glowing dawn flame that was slowly dimming in Frederick's chest. Dr. Eris, Vesper called out to the medic team rushing in. Save him. If he dies, the Ark might just decide to stop breathing out of grief. As the darkness took him again, Frederick thought, at least I didn't have to run 10 miles this time. The recovery took 2 weeks. When Frederick finally woke up in a private room in the Nocturne Tower, which was much nicer than the cell, the world had changed. He sat up. His shoulder was bandaged. He felt light. The heavy burden of the secret was gone. The door opened. It wasn't a nurse. It was Lord Vesper, and the Wolf Headmaster, and the Cat Matriarch, and the Fey High Seer. The 4 headmasters filed into his room. It was terrifying. "Am I being expelled?" Frederick asked, reaching for a glass of water. "No," Vesper said. He pulled up a chair. "We are here to explain." "Explain why your archdean tried to turn the school into a Death Star." "Malachi is in the deep containment cells," the wolf headmaster grunted. "He will not see the sun again. But that is not why we are here." The Fey High Seer stepped forward. She was Edith's mother, glowing with an ethereal light. "Frederick," she said softly, "do you know why the battle wedding ritual exists?" "To bind the 4 houses to an anchor," Frederick recited. "Yes, but why an anchor? Why a 5th element?" Frederick shook his head. "Long ago," Vesper said, "the Leviathan Ark was not piloted by 4 races. It was piloted by 5. The Covenant of 5. Frederick froze. "The vampire, the wolf, the cat, the fey, and the human," Vesper continued. "Humans were the navigators. They were the ones who carried the dawn flame, the only power capable of guiding the Ark through the eclipse tides without madness. They were the moral compass." "But humans died out," Frederick whispered. "On the Ark." "They sacrificed themselves," the cat matriarch said. "Thousands of years ago, a great eclipse threatened to consume everything. The human house burned their life force to create the shielding that protects us today. They went extinct on the Ark to save us." Silence filled the room. "We thought the line was ended," Vesper said. "We created the anchor ritual as a pale imitation, trying to force our own magic to do the job of the dawn flame. It was imperfect. It was dangerous. But it was all we had. Until you," the Fey Seer said. "When you arrived, the Ark woke up. We didn't send the letters to test you, Frederick. The Ark printed those letters. The Ark commanded the ritual." Frederick stared at them. "So, the battle wedding." "It was not a hazing," Vesper admitted, looking almost ashamed. "It was the inauguration ceremony for the 5th seat, the human seat." "And the girls?" Frederick asked. "Did they know?" "They knew they were guardians," the wolf headmaster said. "Their duty was to test the candidate. If the candidate was weak, they were to reject him to save the ship. If he was strong, they were to bind him." Vesper sighed. "We did not expect them to fall in love with you. Nor did we expect you to rewrite the laws of the Covenant to ban ownership. But perhaps that is what a navigator does. He charts a new course." Vesper stood up and bowed. A deep, formal bow. "Welcome home, Navigator Frederick. The 5th house is yours to rebuild." The balcony of the restored Nocturne Tower overlooked the entire academy. The purple clouds were gone, replaced by the glittering stardust of a calm ether sea. Frederick leaned against the railing. He wore a new uniform. It was still gray, but the cut was better, and it had a small white insignia over the heart, a flame inside a gear. Martha walked up beside him. She didn't glide. She walked. "Anchorhead," she teased. "Or is it Dean Frederick now?" "It's just Frederick," he said. "Or the mechanic, if I'm fixing the toaster." "The council ratified your reforms this morning," Martha said, looking out at the city. "No more bullying of non-magical species. The scholarship program is expanded, and the battle wedding is officially renamed the Union of 5 ceremony. Optional participation." "Good," Frederick said. "Forced marriage is so last era." Martha turned to him. Her red eyes were soft. "You know," she said quietly, "just because the contract is void doesn't mean the offer is off the table." Frederick looked at her. The romance with the others had settled into something beautiful. Mabel was his fiercest friend, his sister-in-arms. Pearl was his confidant and chaos partner. Edith was his moral compass. But Martha was the one who had stood in the silence with him. "I told you," Frederick said, reaching out to take her hand. "I don't belong to anyone." "I know," Martha smiled. "That's why I like you." "But Frederick continued, intertwining his fingers with hers. "I am planning to stay in this sector for a very long time, and I could use a co-pilot." Martha leaned in, resting her forehead against his. "I think the Nocturne Court can spare a vampire for navigation duty." It wasn't a fireworks kiss. It was quiet. It was steady. It was the feeling of a ship finally finding its harbor. Epilogue. The great hall was buzzing, but not with a sound of bullying or fear. It was the sound of collaboration. At the exchange and miscellaneous table, which was now just called Table 5 Roarin', the avian boy was showing a young wolf how to calibrate a compass. A vampire was explaining history to a dryad. Frederick walked into the hall. He wasn't wearing a crown. He was carrying a tray. On the tray was a massive, undented, shiny new industrial tea urn. He set it down on Table 5. "All right," Frederick announced, his voice cutting through the noise, not with magic, but with simple presence. "Fresh batch, gray tea, bergamot. Hot enough to melt a whole plating." Mabel walked by, stealing a cookie from the tray. "You are the head of the Ark, Frederick. You shouldn't be serving tea." "I didn't come here to be worshipped, Mabel," Frederick said, pouring a cup for a shy first-year goblin. "I came here to be useful." Pearl hopped onto the table, swinging her legs. "And to show off." "And to show off," Frederick admitted with a smirk. Edith floated by, placing a flower in the vase on the table. "The Ark is happy, Frederick. Can you hear it?" Frederick paused. He closed his eyes. Beneath the chatter of the students, beneath the hum of the engines, deep in the bone and marrow of the Leviathan, there was a rhythm. Thump-thump. It was steady. It was calm. It was the heartbeat of a monster that had finally been tamed by a mechanic. Frederick opened his eyes and raised his cup to his friends. "To the drift," he said. "To the drift," they answered. Outside, the Leviathan Ark adjusted its course, turning its massive head toward the unexplored stars, carrying its strange, chaotic, wonderful family into the dawn. The end.